Now we're going to talk about more types of data structures. So we've already seen a type of data structure, the list, but today we're going to talk about some different types. And these different types of data structures you can use them for your convenience. So one type of data structure may be more convenient to use at one point than another one may be. And I'll just show you a couple more. And then you'll see, at some point you may want to use a certain type, and at another point you may want to use a different data structure. And it just helps you make organizing your code and keeping track of everything and keeping track of data very nice and very convenient. So the first data structure that we're going to look at is going to be a set. And I will just write down the general structure of a set. So let's write down, and let's save it in the variable sets, and we'll make sets equal to, and then we're going to create a set. And to start a set, we're just going to open and close curly brackets. So everything inside here is part of the set. And very similar to lists, we also just put in our elements inside and we separate them by commas. So the first element could be element 1, and the second element could be element 2. The third element could be another element of element 1. So what that means, for example, is that we can have repeating elements, so that we have, for example, if we go into a conference, or we set up a conference and we ask people to put in their age, then it could be that element 1 is 25, element 2 is 30, and element 1 is, or the next element is 25 again. So we've got two people who are 25 years old and one person who's 30 years old. But we only care about the certain range of ages. And so what sets would actually do, or what a set would do, is it removes repeated elements, but we'll see that in a second. Let's just keep writing down the general structure. And then we'll write down element 4, for example. So what we have here is we have our first element, and then the comma to act as a separator to indicate that we're going to put in the next element, and then the next element, a comma, and now we have a repeated element and a comma, and then our final element. And so the commas are just like we saw in lists, they act as separators. And now, if we print sets, let's just see what this looks like. What we see is that the repetition of element 1 has been removed. So this is the point of the sets, that repeated elements, for example, aren't really kept track of. You only care about individual, if they have occurred or not. And another really interesting thing that we see is that rather, or comparing to lists, sets don't really have order. So we see here, even though we put in element 4 last, we have element 4 here in the middle. And that's because sets are just there to keep track of what you have and what you don't have, or rather, just keep track of what you have. And lists have a specific order, and we can access the elements through indices and stuff. And there, we want to access, the elements one by one and index by index, and we want to keep them in a certain order. But in the sets, we don't really care about the order that much. All we care about is if it's there. And so, sets may be more convenient at sometimes if you don't really care about keeping track of everything or about duplicate elements. All you care about is if it's there or not. And so what we can do, for example, just to check if it's there, we can use an if statement. We can do if element 1 in sets. So what we're doing is we make an if statement by the if keyword, and then we check if element 1 is in sets, and so the variable sets corresponds to this set. And if it is, let's just print yes. So let's run this, and what we see is, well, first we see our set with no repeated elements and also no specific order, and then we check if element 1 is in sets. So yeah, element 1 is in here, and so we print yes. And so this is kind of the principle of sets, that you can just keep track of it. You only keep track of it once, and you just want to know if it's there. So let's just comment this out and leave this up here for reference, so that we can look at it later. And let's deal with an example. And let's make a little code that asks participants to put in their country where they're from, and then in the end we're just going to group it as a set. So let's start off with a list, for example, and let's just make an empty list, or yeah, we can just call our list. Let's just call it list, or we can call it country lists, because we want to put countries inside here. So we'll call our list country lists. And we just assign it an empty list, so open and close square brackets. And then we're going to make a for loop. So for, and then let's have 5 elements. So we'll just do a for loop 5 times. So for I in range 5. And now what we're going to do is we're going to ask for user input, which we've seen earlier. And we're just going to save that user input in the list. And then later on, we're going to convert it to a set. But yeah, so let's just deal with the input first. So country is equal to, and then we ask for the input. So we're saving the input in the variable country. And then to the message to the user, we type in, please enter your country. And then we do a little formatting with a colon and a space so that it looks a little bit nicer. And now what we do is we just loop through it 5 times, and each time we ask the user or a different user to enter their country, and we save it in country. And then let's just append country to the country list. So we've got country list, and to it we want to append. So we do the dot, which indicates that we want to do something to it, and then type what we want to do. We want to append, and inside the brackets behind the append, we put in what we want to append. So we want to append country. And then we'll just do, or we'll create our country set afterwards. And to create a set from a different data type before, we can do, so we'll save it in country set, and we'll use the keyword set. So you can see it get colored. That indicates it has a specific function. We'll open, close square brackets, and we're going to turn our country list into a set, and then we'll print both of them. So don't worry, we'll run the code in a second. We'll go through it in detail, but let's just write it out first once. So let's print our country list, and let's print our country set. Okay, great. So let's run the code. And so now we get asked for input. So maybe the first country would be the US. Then we've got someone from France. Then we've got someone from India maybe, and Brazil. And now we've got a repeat user from France. Okay, so let's see what happened. All right, so we get the output, US, France, India, Brazil, and France. And so this is our first output here, which is a list, which we see because it's open and close square brackets. And here we've converted the country list to a set by using the set keyword and parentheses behind it. And so our country set is the set of the country list. And when we look in here, when we look into our set, the open and closed curly brackets, we see that France, which was a repeat up here, only occurs once. And we also see that US is no longer in the first place, and generally the order has been kind of mixed and matched. So we can see the differences between lists and sets, and we can see that sets are here to help us keep track of what we have, and we don't really care, we don't really care that much, when did it happen. We don't want to keep track of the specific order, whereas in lists we want to keep track of exactly everything we have and the specific order. So we do care that France occurred twice, we care when it occurred, and here in sets we just care about if it happened. And so what we did here is we just made a loop. We asked for user input to enter their country. We save it in the country. We add the country to the end of our list. And we do that 5 times because we have a range of 5. And then here afterwards, we converted our list. So this list that we've created to a set, and we saved it in the variable country set, and we converted it using the set keyword. And then afterwards, in the end, we just printed both of them. Yeah, so here we can see, for example, what the difference between a set and a list is. And now if you want to see if a specific country has attended the conference, so let's say if Brazil in country set, and then let's print attended. So we just made a little if statement that checks if Brazil is in our country set, so no repeat elements, just the set that keeps track of what we have. And if they are, we print that they attended, or we print attended. So let's run our code again. Let's input our countries again: US, France, India, Brazil, and France again. And now we see our list that's printed from here, which we also can indicate because of the square parentheses. Then we see our set, which is here, which has the curly parentheses, which doesn't include the repeat elements, and also the order isn't specific, it's just mixed and matched. And then we see, or we check rather, if Brazil is in country set. Yep, Brazil is in the set. And then we just print out attended. And so the set we can use, if we have a lot of input, so if we have, if we're keeping track of all these countries and there are 5,000 participants, but we only reach, say, 80 countries, we don't want to keep track of the same countries over and over. We just want to know if they attended or not. And so we don't have to make a list containing 5,000 elements. We just have to make a set that has 80 elements in it. So sets can be, they have their uses. It depends on the situation. But they can also help you with management of memory. They can also make things smaller. It's just for organization and also for convenience. So depending on when you need it, they may be a very nice thing to use. Okay. So let's move on from sets and move on to something very similar called dictionaries. And our dictionaries have a key and a value pair. So let's write that down. And let's comment all of this out so that we don't see it when we run our next code. And let's write down the general form of a dictionary. So a dictionary looks like this. So we'll just save our dictionary in the variable dictionary. And to start a dictionary, we also use curly parentheses. So we open and close curly parentheses. Now, the difference between a dictionary and a set is that a dictionary has a key, and it has a corresponding value. And we have the corresponding value by putting in the colon and then typing in the value. And now this is one element. And now if you want to put in a next key value pair, we put in a comma, and then we type in our second key and our second value. And so again, we see we have our key here, and the corresponding value is value. And to show that the value corresponds to the key, we use the colon here. And then we have our next element, or our next key value pair, and then we've got our second key, and corresponding, so the colon, corresponding to this key is the second value. And now we can add a third key, for example, so key 3, and corresponding to this key is a third value. And now the values in dictionaries are also unique. So there should be no repetition of the values here. And this you can, for example, use as a translation tool, for example. So you could have the key, which would be the word in the English language, and then you would have the word translated into another language, like Spanish, for example, so that you can use your dictionary, and you can look up the English word, or you can access the English word, and you would get the translated word. But yeah, let's just go through an example here too. So we'll just leave the general form of the dictionary up here, and then we'll make some examples. So let's deal with a very similar example as we have up here. So let's actually keep this code, and let's continue to ask the users for their country. And now what we're going to do is we want to keep track of the country, and we also want to keep track of how many times the country occurred. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our key be the country, and our value is going to be how many times it occurred. So we'll just write this down, and then we'll see it in action afterwards, and then we'll really go through it in detail and really understand what happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a for loop this time, and we're going to go through our country list. So for country in country list, and then we start the for loop with a colon. And now you may notice here I use country up here to save the user input, but as soon as I use it here as my temporary variable, the data is going to be overwritten. So like every time I ask for new input, the data is going to be overwritten. And if I use it here, the data is also going to be overwritten. So I'm not going to have a confliction with up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through our country list, country by country. And if it's a new country, we'll add it to our dictionary. And if the country already exists in the dictionary, we'll increase its value by 1. So let's check first if it's a new country. So what we're going to do is if, we should probably have our country dictionary first. So let's make our country dictionary, and let's just have it be an empty dictionary, which we indicate by the open and closed curly parentheses. And now what we're going to do is if country in country dictionary. So if our country is in the country dictionary, so if the country is a key here, then what we're going to do is our country dictionary. And now to access the key, so if when we had lists, access an element, for example, we would have list, and to access the first element, we would do the square brackets behind the list and put in the index. Now it works similar for dictionaries, but for dictionaries, so we also put these square parentheses behind, the open and closed, but instead of putting the index, we have to put in the key. So in this case, the key would be the country. And so if the country is in there, what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 to it, to the value. So we're going to increment the value by 1. And don't worry, we'll go through this code again in a second. We're just writing it out right now, and then we'll run it, and then we'll go through it step by step in detail to really understand what's happening. And else, so if our country is not in the country dictionary, we're going to add it. So country dictionary, and then country is equal to 1. So we access our country dictionary, and the key that we're going to create is going to be the country, and we put that in square brackets behind, and we're going to assign it the value 1. And so a cool thing about the dictionary is that if the key doesn't exist, rather than comparison to lists, for example, if there is no element 6, but I try to access element 6 or the index 5, I would get an error because my element is not in the list. But for a dictionary, if you try to access an element that's not on the list, what it would do is it would create the element, or it would create the key, and you just have to assign it a certain value. So what we do here is we access our country dictionary, and we access, or we create a key, we give it the value 1. And then in the end, let's just print our country dictionary. And now let's run this, and then we'll go through it step by step to really understand what's happening. So we have to enter our countries again first. US, France, India, Brazil, and France again. Okay, and now what happened? So our country list after this looks like what we have up here. So that part hasn't changed. So our country list is still a list that has everything in order: US, France, India, Brazil, France. So that's our country list. And now our country dictionary initially is empty. So it's an empty dictionary. And now we enter the for loop. So for our temporary variable country in country list, so we're going to go through this list one by one. So maybe we can just copy paste this over here, and so that we can kind of follow along and go through it one by one. So country is going to first take on the value US. Now, if our country is in the country dictionary, so currently our country dictionary is empty up here, so it's not. So we go down here and we go into the else. And now what we do is we create a key in the country dictionary, and the key's value is going to be country. So what we're doing right now is we're adding a key value pair to it, and it looks like the key is going to be country, and our value is going to be 1. But since country is a variable, the key is actually going to be the value of this variable, which in this case is US. And so this is what this does. This actually creates the key value pair, and it creates the key US, and it assigns it the value 1, which we have here, and it does that automatically for us. And now we go through the loop again, and since now country is France, and we check if country and country dictionary, well, currently our dictionary looks like this, so this is our dictionary now. But yet still, France is not in the dictionary, so we don't go in here. And we're here again, and we do country dictionary, and this time country is France. So now we're going to add France. And France also has the starting value 1. Yeah, and now we go through, and country takes on India. And, well, we've added this element, so let's put that up here. And now we check, is India in our country dictionary? It's not. So we go into the else clause, and then we check, or we create India. So, and our program does this all automatically for us, and we put in, or it puts in India here, and it gives it the value 1, because we assign it the value 1. And the India key comes from this, comes from the country value. And so now country takes on the value Brazil, and now we see here, so we check, is India in here? So we check if Brazil is in here, and so our values are US, France, and India, but Brazil is not in there. So we go in here, into the else clause, and we just create Brazil. So Brazil gets created in here too, and the computer does all this for us, and it also gives it the value 1, because that's what we assigned this value here. And now country takes on the final value, which is France. And now we check is, or if country is in country dictionary, so is France in the country dictionary? So our country dictionary currently looks like this. Is France in here? Ah, yes, France is in here. So now we enter this, and we do country dictionary and the France key. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 to France. So we access our key, and we add 1 to it. So it's 1 plus 1, and so now France is 2. And this is exactly what we see here. And we also see here from dictionaries, just like sets, there is no order. And the way you access the elements is just purely through using the key. But in comparison to lists, so lists, everything is nice and ordered, but dictionaries, just like sets, they order in them. But the way you access the elements, rather than using indices, is that you use the keys to the value that you want to access. So yeah, now we've used dictionaries to keep track of how many times how many participants from each country we have, and we've eliminated the repeats. And now this may, for example, be nice if we have 5 countries attending our conference, but there are 100 participants, and now we don't want a list with 100 participants. We just want to know how many times each value has occurred, and so we can keep track of that in a dictionary. And every time a value occurred, we increase or every time someone from that country registers, we increase the value by 1. And if it's a new country, we just add it to our dictionary, and it does it all automatically for us. So dictionaries are also a really, really cool thing to use, just like sets and just like lists, but they all have their different functions. And depending on what you want to do, a dictionary may be more beneficial for you than a list or a set. But they're all very situational. But the point is that there are different data structures that you can use, and they will really help you depending on what functions you want to do.